The wind cut to the frontier town like a blade, lifting the red dust into the faces of those gathered around the auction yard. The air smelled of sweat, fear, and horse dung. Men in wide-brimmed hats muttered prices, their voices dry as tobacco leaves. On the wooden platform stood a young woman, her wrists bound loosely, her dress threadbare, her hair tangled by the storm. Her eyes, dark, cautious, alive, moved over a crowd but did not linger on any face. She had learned what lingering cost. Somewhere behind her, a whip cracked, and the auctioneer's voice thundered, promising strength, obedience, and silence in one weary package. A tall rancher leaned on a fence post at the edge of the crowd, his hat low, his jaw rough with several days' beard. He did not come to buy. He came because he needed help at the ranch. A pair of hands, nothing more. But the sight of her, small against the rising dust, pulled something old and painful inside him. When the bidding began, most men laughed. The war had taken stronger hands, prettier faces. He raised his hand anyway, quietly. No one outbid him. The hammer fell with a hollow thud that echoed against the dry boards, and in that moment the world went still. She didn't thank him when he cut her rope. Gratitude was dangerous. It gave hope a pulse, and she had buried hope long ago. He simply nodded, told her to gather what was hers, and led her toward the wagon. They rode in silence down a road lined with brittle grass and whispering cottonwoods. The sun was low, bleeding gold into the horizon. The wagon's wheels moaned under the weight of their silence. She studied the man beside her. His hands were large, marked with burns and scars, veins like rope under the skin. He looked like someone who'd buried too many things, dreams, maybe people. The ranch rose from the land like something half alive. Fences leaning, barns slouching, windmill turning slow. Horses lifted their heads as the wagon passed. The smell of hay and smoke filled her lungs, grounding her in this strange new place. A small figure ran from the porch, bare feet kicking up dust, a little girl with hair like pale corn silk. She stopped short when she saw the stranger. "Papa, who's she?" "Someone to help us," he said, setting the reins down. The girl stared, wide-eyed and shy, before darting back into the house. The woman followed him through the door, stepping into dim light, and the scent of old wood and stew left on the stove. A small chair sat by the fire, untouched, beside an empty cradle covered in dust. She understood more in that moment than words could tell. Grief lived here, quiet and patient. He showed her where she'd sleep, a narrow cot in a corner room near the barn door. You'll rise early, feed the horses, sweep, help the child with her meals. You'll have Sundays for rest if you want them. His voice was steady but not cold. She nodded. "Yes, sir." "Name?" he asked. "Evelyn," she said softly, though it felt strange on her tongue. It wasn't the name she was born with, but it was the one she kept safe from men who used names like chains. That night, thunder rolled across the sky. She stepped outside to gather laundry before the rain came and saw something carved deep into the barnwood, a crooked mark, half hidden by shadow. The sight froze her. She knew that mark. It belonged to the men who'd sold her, men who didn't like their debts wandering free. She pressed her palm to it, then drew back quickly, heart pounding. The rancher's dog barked once in the distance, and she forced herself back inside. The little girl lay curled by the fire, her hair fanned out like a halo. Evelyn watched her sleep, then glanced at the rancher sitting near the window. He held a worn photograph in his hands. His late wife, she guessed. The lamplight touched the edge of his face, showing the line of his jaw trembling slightly. When he noticed her standing there, he set the photo down, cleared his throat, and muttered, "Storm will pass by morning." "Yes, sir," she said again, but her voice carried something different this time. Not fear, something closer to understanding. Rain came hard that night. Evelyn couldn't sleep. Each crack of thunder made her flinch, thinking of boots pounding toward her, hands grabbing, the sound of laughter in dark corners. She rose quietly, fetched a bucket to catch the leak near her cot, and found herself humming without realizing it. A tune her mother used to hum when storms came. The notes filled the small space, soft and steady. The next morning, she woke early. The rancher was already outside, chopping wood. His shirt clung to him, sweat mixing with rain, each swing of the axe heavy with something unspoken. She brought him water, without being asked. He nodded, surprised, and took it. The silence between them shifted, no longer wary, but fragile, like a bridge just beginning to hold weight. Days passed in a rhythm both brutal and peaceful. She worked from dawn until her hands cracked, scrubbed until her skin bled, and still found small peace in the sound of horses breathing, the way sunlight hit the hay at noon. The little girl followed her everywhere, asking questions, offering flowers, bringing life back into the old house. One afternoon, while Evelyn was mending a torn curtain, the child climbed into her lap and touched her cheek. "You smile like Mama," she said simply. Evelyn froze. The rancher, who had been standing nearby, looked away sharply, his jaw tightening. She must have been kind," Evelyn murmured. "She was," he said quietly, voice rough with memory. "And you don't need to fill her place." "I wasn't trying to," she answered. But something in his eyes said he already knew that. That evening, as the sky burned red and violet, she found herself standing by the barn again. The mark was still there, mocking her. She traced it with one trembling finger, whispering a prayer she barely remembered. Behind her, the windmill creaked, and from the house came the sound of laughter. The child's laughter, quick and bright. She closed her eyes. Maybe for tonight, she could let that sound be her shield. Inside, the rancher poured 2 cups of coffee. When she stepped in, soaked from the wind, he slid one toward her, without a word. Steam curled between them. For the first time, she met his eyes fully. He didn't look away. Something unspoken passed across that small table. Something like a truce, or maybe the first fragile thread of trust. Outside, the storm gathered again, rolling over the plains like an old ghost returning. But inside the ranch house, the fire burned steady, and for the first time in years the man, the child, and the woman who'd been sold felt, however briefly, like a family waiting for dawn. Morning light poured over the prairie, washing the land in pale gold. The ranch seemed quieter after the storm, though the air still held the scent of wet wood and horses. Evelyn stood by the corral, watching the rancher saddle his horse. He was leaving for town to trade supplies, his arm wrapped in a rough bandage from an old splinter. The little girl clung to his leg until he promised to bring her a ribbon the color of the evening sky. When he rode away, the sound of hooves faded into the wind, leaving behind a silence that felt too large for 2 souls. Evelyn fed the animals, mended fences, swept the porch. Every movement was practiced, mechanical, yet beneath her calm, she carried the weight of the symbol carved on the barn. It had not vanished. The groove still glared back at her, like a wound that refused to close. She had not told the rancher, though the secret pressed on her ribs like a stone. If he knew what it meant, he might send her away. She could not bear to see the little girl's eyes fill with that kind of loss. By midday, the sun had turned merciless. She paused at the well, drawing cool water, when she saw 3 distant figures on the ridge, riders, unmoving, watching. Her breath hitched. They sat still as stones, their faces hidden by the glare. Then one raised a hand, a mocking salute, before turning his horse. The others followed, vanishing into the glare of the plains. Evelyn gripped the well's edge until her knuckles whitened. They had found her again. When the rancher returned near dusk, she met him at the gate, her apron twisted in her hands. "Someone was here," she whispered. He frowned, scanning the horizon. "Tracks. Just riders." They didn't come close. He studied her face, then the trembling in her fingers. "You're safe here," he said at last, though his eyes searched the darkening hills as if daring them to prove him wrong. That night, he checked the rifle by the door, bolted the shutters, and set a lamp to burn low until dawn. The next days brought tension so subtle it almost felt imagined. The town whispered when they went for supplies. Women stared too long at Evelyn, their eyes sharp with curiosity or jealousy. Men whispered to the rancher at the saloon about impropriety, about keeping a servant too close. He ignored them, but gossip clung like smoke. At night, he sat by the window long after the fire burned down, watching the line where the land met the stars. Evelyn began to sense a divide between them growing. built not from mistrust, but from fear of what others might think. The child, unaware of these grown world shadows, only saw comfort in Evelyn's presence. She begged for stories before sleep. Stories of birds that flew beyond the mountains and flowers that never died. Evelyn told them softly, her voice carrying the rhythm of lullabies her mother once sang. Each word braided her heart tighter to the child's. One evening, while gathering laundry from the line, Evelyn tripped on a loose board and gashed her palm. The rancher found her sitting on the porch, blood dripping into the dust. Without a word, he fetched warm water and cleaned the wound, his rough hands careful as if touching something sacred. She flinched when the cloth stung. "Hold still," he murmured. "You'll scar if you keep moving." She looked up, caught his gaze, and for a heartbeat the world fell silent. There was something unspoken in his eyes, recognition, perhaps longing, but it flickered away as quickly as it came. When he finished wrapping her hand, she whispered, "Thank you." "Don't mention it," he said, but his voice was too soft for indifference. Rain came again, a steady whisper against the windows. The child had fallen asleep near the hearth. Evelyn stood by the fire, her injured hand bandaged, her hair damp from the night air. The rancher leaned against the mantel, staring into the flames. "She used to sing when it rained," he said, voice distant. "My wife said it kept the spirits away." Evelyn hesitated, then hummed quietly, almost without meaning to. The melody filled the space between them, carrying warmth into the cold corners of the room. His eyes closed for a moment, as though hearing something long buried. When she stopped, he didn't speak again, but the silence afterward felt changed, less empty, more alive. The next morning, the wind shifted. Tracks appeared by the creek. Fresh, deep, too many for stray travelers. The rancher crouched to study them, jaw tightening. He followed them a ways before turning back, saying only, "Keep the girl close today." Evelyn understood without asking. The shadow from her past was not done hunting. By afternoon, riders returned. This time they came closer, 3 men, their laughter crude, echoing across the dry grass. Evelyn stood on the porch with the child behind her, heart pounding. The men stopped just beyond the gate. The tallest one, with a scar running down his neck, tipped his hat. "Pretty thing you got here, mister," he called when the rancher stepped outside. "Looks awful familiar." "Get off my land," the rancher said evenly. "Not till we collect what's owed. That woman there, she belongs to us. Bought and paid for." Evelyn's knees trembled, but she stood firm. The rancher's hand hovered near his belt, his voice steady. "You best ride on." The men laughed, spat, and finally turned their horses. Dust rose behind them like smoke. When they were gone, the rancher faced her. "You need to tell me the truth," he said quietly. She did. Every piece. Her brother's gambling, the debt, the night she was sold to settle it, the mark on the barn, the riders. The silence that followed her confession was heavy as the storm clouds gathering above. He didn't scold or pity her. He only said, "No one owns you now." She wanted to believe him, but she had lived too long under the weight of men's words. Still, when he placed a rifle beside her door that night, she felt a kind of safety she hadn't known since childhood. The storm that came was fierce, wind howling through the cracks, lightning splitting the horizon. In its chaos, they struck again. Shots shattered the quiet, glass broke, and the little girl screamed. Evelyn dragged her under the stairs, heart pounding, the rifle cold in her hands. One of the men burst through the door, face twisted with rage. He grabbed her arm, yanking her into the open. She fired once, the sound deafening. He fell. The rancher appeared moments later, bleeding from a cut on his arm, his revolver smoking. Together they drove the others off into the rain. The silence afterward roared louder than the storm itself. Smoke rose from the curtains where a lantern had fallen, and part of the roof caught flame. They beat it down with wet blankets until the air turned thick with ash and fear. When dawn came, the house still stood, scar behold. The little girl slept in Evelyn's lap, her small hand curled around the woman's sleeve. The rancher sat nearby, exhaustion carved into his face. He met Evelyn's eyes and said, "They'll come again, but next time we'll be ready." She nodded, Feeling the truth of his words settle deep, the fire crackled, throwing light across the three of them, man, child, and woman bound by something stronger than survival. For the first time, Evelyn did not feel like someone passing through another man's mercy. She felt like someone with a home worth fighting for. And somewhere outside, beneath the soft hum of the waking plains, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for. The sky was red that morning, the kind of red that warned of violence before it came. Evelyn stood on the porch, the rifle across her knees, the smell of gun oil and smoke still clinging to the air from nights past. The rancher was mending the broken window, his movement steady but strained. Every sound, the creak of the wood, the cry of the windmill, seemed to echo louder than usual, as though the land itself was waiting for something to begin. The little girl played quietly inside, humming the tune Evelyn had taught her, unaware that her world teetered on the edge of another storm. For 3 days, they had lived in uneasy peace. The men who attacked had vanished into the desert, but both Evelyn and the rancher knew they hadn't gone far. Danger moved like scent on the wind, subtle, persistent, impossible to forget. The sheriff had ridden by once, offering words that meant little and protection that would never come. In the frontier, justice moved slower than blood, and both of them knew the past had to be faced, not hidden from. Evelyn packed provisions quietly that morning. The rancher watched her from the doorway. "You mean to run?" he asked, his tone unreadable. She shook her head. "I mean to end it." He studied her face, the steadiness in her eyes, and saw that she had crossed the threshold from fear to resolve. "Then you're not going alone," he said. They rode out before sunrise, the land stretching endless and pale around them. The air carried the dry scent of sagebrush and dust. Evelyn's heart thudded with every hoofbeat. She knew these men, their greed, their cruelty, the way they saw women like her as property instead of flesh and soul. But she wasn't the same trembling girl sold under a blazing sun. She had learned to fight, to protect something more precious than her own safety. By midday, they reached a ravine near the edge of the canyon, where she'd seen the riders vanish before. Tracks led down into the hollow, and faint smoke curled upward. The rancher dismounted, eyes scanning the rocks. "They're here." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of whiskey and gunpowder. Then came a voice, smooth and cruelly familiar. "You always did have a way of running, sis." Evelyn froze. Her brother stepped from behind a boulder, his face hardened by years of drink and hate. The scarred man beside him held a revolver loose in his hand. "You've made quite a mess of things," her brother said. "Shot one of my men. Hit on another man's land like a stray." "You sold me," she whispered. Her voice was steady, but her body shook. "You took my life for a bottle." He smirked. "You were worth more than the family ever gave me." The rancher's hand brushed above his gun, but he didn't draw. "You've got 2 choices," he said evenly. "Ride out and never look back, or stay here and find out how far I'll go to keep my home safe." Her brother's grin faltered. "Home? You think she belongs here? She's damaged goods, cowboy. You'll end up like the rest, broken alone." Evelyn stepped forward, placing herself between them. The wind tugged at her hair, her voice low but sure. "You don't get to call me anything. I'm done belonging to you." The moment hung suspended. Then the scarred man raised his gun. Everything happened at once. The crack of gunfire, the smell of smoke, the echo bouncing off the canyon walls. Evelyn hit the ground, pain burning across her shoulder. The rancher fired twice, dropping the scarred man. Her brother ducked behind a rock, shouting curses. The rancher crawled to her side, gripping her arm. "You all right?" "It's just a graze," she said, biting back a groan. "We can't let him go." Another shot rang out, splintering stone near his head. He returned fire, the bullet striking her brother's leg. The man screamed, falling to one knee. Evelyn rose slowly, blood staining her sleeve, and walked toward him. He reached for his weapon, but she kicked it aside. "You had every chance," she said softly, "but you chose to sell what little good was left in you." He looked up, eyes wild. "You think this man cares about you? He bought you too." She shook her head. "No, he gave me back what you stole." For a long moment, only the wind answered. Her brother tried to stand, then fell back, clutching his wound. The rancher approached, his face unreadable. "Leave him," Evelyn said. "Let the desert finish what it started." They walked away without looking back. The sky had turned pale again, streaked with thin clouds. Every breath burned with dust, but each step felt lighter. When they reached the ridge, the ranch stretched below them, a battered house, a smoking chimney, a place that had somehow survived everything thrown against it. By the time they returned, twilight had fallen. The little girl ran out from the doorway, tears bright on her cheeks. She threw her arms around Evelyn's waist, pressing her face against the blood-stained dress. "Papa said you'd come back," she whispered. Evelyn smiled through exhaustion, stroking the child's hair. "Of course I did." Inside, the fire was burning low. The rancher poured her water, his movements gentle. He said little while he cleaned her wound, only glancing up once. "You didn't have to stand in front of me like that," he murmured. "I did," she replied. "We protect what we love." He paused, his hand stilling for a heartbeat. "Then I reckon we both got something worth keeping." Silence stretched between them, comfortable now, filled with everything words could never quite hold. Outside, the wind had softened. The prairie, usually so harsh, seemed almost tender in its quiet. The little girl settled between them by the fire, half asleep, her small fingers tangled in Evelyn's hand. When the lamp burned down to its last flicker, the rancher spoke again. "I buried her out there," he said quietly, nodding toward the hill beyond the barn. "My wife. I thought I'd done all the loving a man could do." Evelyn looked at the flame, the way it bent and shimmered. "Love doesn't end," she said. "It just waits for a place to grow again." He smiled then, a small, fragile smile that carried years of pain and a hint of peace. "Then stay," he said, "not as a servant. Stay because this is your home too." The words hung between them, soft as prayer. Evelyn felt the weight of every mile she had traveled, every cruelty she had endured, and for the first time it didn't crush her. It lifted. She nodded, unable to speak. The rancher's daughter stirred, looked up sleepily, and whispered, "Does that mean you're my mama now?" Evelyn laughed quietly, tears slipping free. "If you'll have me." The child smiled, and in that smile was everything. The forgiveness, the beginning, the life after fire. Outside, the moon rose over the plains, silver in the fields, turning the world gentle again. The night smelled of ash and rain, and something clean, like a promise kept. The house no longer felt haunted. It breathed. Evelyn stood by the window long after the others had gone to sleep, watching the horizon stretch endless and calm. The mark on the barn had been scrubbed away that morning, leaving only smooth beneath her hand. She traced it once more, not in fear now, but in remembrance. When dawn finally broke, light spilled over the land like forgiveness. Somewhere in that light, a woman who had been sold in silence stood unbroken, holding the life she had built with her own scarred hands. And out there on the open plain, the wind carried the faint sound of laughter, the kind that belongs to those who have survived and stayed to tell the story.